Hi, Ann.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm good. Good to see you back on Blogging Heads TV in seemingly good health.
Well, I'm surprised you let me come back after the tirade of outrage over my last appearance with.
You got a little roughed up by a few of our viewers.
Yeah,
Blogging Heads is not for the faint of heart, but yeah, in the comments section, a few of our viewers took after you. What do you attribute that to?
Well,
jealousy?
I think I have some haters who follow me around the web and monitor my activities, and
that's flattering. I don't think I have many of those.
Well,
I aspire to.
It's lots of fun. You should get
Is it?
some.
Well, don't kind of all bloggers have a few people who don't like them?
I don't know. I think I think I attract a special crowd. I don't know how I do it. Now, actually, I'm doing it on purpose, and they're actually doing my bidding.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, isn't that what some of them, don't some of them have that theory? Don't they hate you for being so good at attracting haters?
Yeah, that's considered an accomplishment, so I mark it all to my credit there.
Huh.
I know you didn't want to start with this topic. Sorry to bring it up.
No, this is great for ratings, I think. I think the more they hate you, the better. If you can say anything, hate-worthy, go ahead, lead with it.
Well, I think, they'll have to watch to catch all the little details.
Let's keep them on the edge of their seats.
What?
Let's keep them in suspense as to what exactly they're going to be hating you for.
Yeah. It's going to be tough. But I'm doing it on purpose, and I think if they hate me, they should just understand that they're in my power.
Yeah.
They need to understand the force.
That'll teach them.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but you're obviously tough. You took them on your blog, and that's good. That's what we encourage here at Blogging Heads TV. When I went to high school in Texas, and our arch rival was Robert E. Lee High School, and on the locker room, the boys' locker room at the gym, I think this was emblazoned in tile on the wall. It said, "The Robert E. Lee winning tradition will not be entrusted to the weak and the cowardly," and that's the way I feel about Blogging Heads TV. Our winning tradition.
Okay.
Will not be entrusted to the weak and the cowardly.
Yeah.
I should add, the other time we dialogued, which was the first time, I went to your site to look at the commenters' reactions to it, and there was a lot of mean stuff about me. I think part of it is that when you're not playing in your home field, there's fewer people who love you.
I'll link about this one. I'll post about this one, and so give them a chance to say things about you.
Yeah.
And since you're saying you want people to,
Yeah, I defy them to hate me, Ann.
So you want some antagonists because that will boost you and give you this kind of profile that I have. And so I'll try to encourage them to get serious. Get out.
As a great leader once said, "Bring it on, bring it on."
Yeah.
And that worked out well.
Yeah, well, you wanted to talk about Iraq. That's a good segue.
Excellent segue. I didn't realize I had done it, but I have. Yeah, Iraq. Kind of another seemingly bad week. First of all, how many botched hangings can you work into a single month?
Yeah, and how many different ways can you botch a hanging?
Yeah, who would have guessed? You're having a bad day when you hang a guy and his head pops off, right?
Unless you're trying to do it on purpose. It depends on your definition of a good day. I think it's well known that there's a calculation you're supposed to do that combines the person's weight and the length of the drop, and you're supposed to get the drop right so it breaks the neck and doesn't cause the head to come off.
Is that really true?
Yes. I looked it up on the... Yes. The calculations were figured out in the beginning of the 20th century because there were some notorious cases where the heads came off.
So this
if the
has
head
happened.
comes off today, they wanted it to come off.
It seemed to me so improbable, but apparently this just happens all the time in badly designed hangings.
Only if the drop is too long or the weight is... The heavier the person is... There actually was a recent case in the United States where someone was trying to avoid... or I don't know where they hang, but the theory is if you're too heavy, it's really kind of impossible to do it without the head coming off.
The things you learn on Blogging Heads TV.
Yeah.
Now, I want to say one or two things that that I would say if you were Mickey, just because we have this kind of ongoing discourse about Iraq, and after every week's show, there's something I hear right after the show that I wish I had said on the show, and the thing I wish had happened on last week's show with Mickey is I wish I had heard this John Burns interview. He's a New York Times correspondent whom I have a lot of respect for. And one thing he had said, I've been dissing the surge idea, and I kind of more or less continue to. But he was a little more optimistic than many. He said it's definitely the case that when you send Americans into a neighborhood, it calms down, when they establish like an outpost. And in fact, there was a New York Times story today suggesting that the intimations of a coming crackdown on militia, and apparently that's being kind of preceded by some stuff on the ground now, some tightening of discipline on the part of the Americans and the Iraqis. That actually there are some of the Shiites are putting their arms away for the time being.
Right.
So maybe it'll have some pacifying effect for a while. The other thing Burns said, which I hadn't realized, is that this stuff about benchmarks for Maliki is maybe basically just a way to get rid of him. And when he fails to meet them, as he probably will, they plan to replace him with a Sistani surrogate, which I had not realized. I don't know how they plan to replace him. I mean, but I'm sure they'll find a way.
Well, did you see the story today? It was fairly recently that the Iraqi officials had moved against this is a quote from the New York Times, moved against the country's most powerful Shiite militia, arresting several dozen senior members in the past few weeks.
Yeah, that's in the Mahdi army, right?
Yeah.
That's al-Sadr's group. I was suspicious. I mean, given the fact that the Prime Minister Maliki is dependent for his political authority basically on al-Sadr's ongoing support, I was wondering whether this isn't just kind of a game where they lock them up and usher them into an air-conditioned suite and say, okay, you're locked up here for a few weeks.
Right.
But who knows?
But don't you think, I mean, I don't know that much about how these things work, but don't you think that that he needs to worry, that they need to worry that they'll lose our support, and that we've kind of got a good cop, bad cop routine going on here with the Democrats, and it might work to cause them to do some of the things we need them to do? I mean,
it could, although, I mean, the funny thing, it's not clear to me how much they want us there. I mean, the government seems to continue to want us there. On the other hand, they were not enthusiastic about our increasing our presence in Baghdad, and in fact, the Sunnis are apparently the only people who are very enthusiastic at this now. Ironically, I mean, given the way the war started, they're the ones who think that a robust American presence is in their interest. So I don't know if the current government increasingly doesn't think of us as something that gets in the way of their killing Sunnis.
But then how does that make you feel about the surge? Doesn't that show that the surge should be done, that we shouldn't trust Maliki, and that we
I don't think we should trust...
to sort of stand against him to some extent so that there's not a bloodbath? Isn't that necessary?
Could be. And, I mean, I'm kind of technically agnostic. I for months now, I mean, I was against the war to begin with, but since things got messy, I have not professed to know how to get us out of it, and I'm not convinced that withdrawal is the answer, and I really don't know. I mean, I think it's very unlikely that the surge is going to kind of save the day. Could it conceivably be the least bad alternative? Conceivably, although I'd have a lot more faith in it if I thought that the administration had reconciled itself to what I think really is the kind of the best possible near-term outcome, which is just to basically divide the country up. And right now, the administration's goal is to keep a unified Iraq, and I think that's increasingly improbable. So any strategy premised on that as the goal, I'm very pessimistic about.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong.
Yeah. I have no idea as far as what would work, but I just, continue to think we can't just give up. I mean,
well,
people
I think we,
are the ones that seem to just announce that we've failed and to want to, face up to failure and drop everything. I just don't see how that's a workable answer.
Well, I don't think anybody's embracing failure in the sense of saying, let's do the thing that'll work out the worst. I mean, the question is what will work out the worst. I mean, people who are favoring withdrawal are arguing that that's the least bad alternative. I'm not yet championing withdrawal. But this does kind of lead us to your dissatisfaction with the way some people are handling this politically, right?
I mean, I was listening to Hillary Clinton yesterday. She went to Iraq and then came back, and it was obviously very well planned. Not to pick up the usual story on Hillary Clinton and say that it's all calculated. But, I mean, she goes to Iraq, she meets with a few people, and then she comes back and purports to, based on her trip, have a new understanding and a new proposal. But obviously she's running for president, and, I mean, I guess I just find it a little hard to take that all of what we're doing in Iraq has to be connected with the various political efforts in the United States. So, but there's no other way, is there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I noticed in your dialogue with Matt that, I mean, you were criticizing the congressional Democrats for not seemingly being, on the verge of passing any kind of binding.
I guess I just don't believe they can or will do anything.
Right. I mean, the plan apparently is to say that they're against the surge, but not do anything that would preclude Bush's pursuing the surge. And I'm not sure what legislative tools are available to them. But your criticism was that. I mean, in general, it seems to me you do have kind of a low tolerance for political behavior on the part of politicians.
I know,
maybe especially Democratic politicians, but
I just
I
think
don't know.
The war is more important than the politics, but they're never going to get disaggregated. I know I need to just deal with it, but...
Well, I mean, I would say, in their defense, this is not... I mean, you're right, a lot of things should be more important than politics, certainly when lives are on the line, as they actually often are in domestic policy even, but I would say this in defense of the Democrats. It's not a super clear-cut situation. So, like, in other words, before the war, I was pretty sure the war was a bad idea. I would have been derelict if I had not written some things saying that. And in retrospect, I kind of think maybe I didn't write, well, enough different kinds of things. Yeah. But not that it would have mattered, but I mean, just so you'd have a clear conscience. And any time a politician is in a situation like that, where you really feel this is the right thing to do, this is what will save the lives. But that's on one hand. On the other hand, is the politically opportune thing to do. Yes, I disapprove of them doing the politically opportune thing, but I don't think many people feel that this is such a clear situation. There were people unequivocally opposed to the war at the beginning. There may be a few people now who are sure that withdrawal is the good thing, or are sure that a surge is the bad thing. And if those people are truly sure of that, then I agree that they're subject to your kind of moral critique in playing politics with it. I'm not sure, given how chaotic the situation is, I personally think anybody who feels really sure in this way is either deluded or dishonest. I mean, I just don't think it's very clear to a reasonable person what the best thing to do is. And I think a number of these people may feel that way, and their error may be talking as if they're more sure than they are for political purposes.
Well, I worry about, what do we really want outsiders to hear of our internal squabbles? Obviously, everyone can watch us, and it affects what they do, right? And I've been mostly worried that people will see that we don't have the stomach to fight a long war, and that no matter what we do, we'll be able to be defeated by just, these sort of guerrilla warfare activities, and that we can never stand up to it, and that letting people see that is harmful to our interests. But lately I've been thinking that, there's something on the other side, too, that the Democrats may actually be helping by letting people on the outside see that, power's going to change hands or could change hands in 2008, and they need to get their act together and do something and not just expect us to go on forever, right? It would also maybe be bad for people to know that we'll just hang on forever out of fear of looking like we can't take it.
It could be. You could make a kind of alternative argument, which is that, A, in my view, President Bush has ill-served the national interest. B, he's become a symbol abroad for the kind of American behavior that people don't like, that a lot of Europeans don't like, that a lot of people in Muslim nations don't like, and the belief that he represents America is itself inimical to American interests, because the more people think that he represents the real America, the more that they think that all of his policies are truly representative of America, the more trouble we'll be in, the more people who will hate us, and the more reluctant allies will be to ally, and maybe it's in our interest to clearly distance ourselves from George Bush and start rebranding the country. There's that argument.
Well, I sort of don't like the idea of the country being branded. I think it's sort of, I'm going to take the position that it's good for the world to see that we have a vibrant democracy with a range of opinions represented, and that whatever happens at any given time will feed into what happens in the next election. And, you know, we're always rebalancing ourselves, and we can't have one particular thing pinned on us, you know, that we're sort of an ongoing process here, and that ought to be seen as a good thing. Although we're trying to sell democracy, and supposedly other people will look at us and say we want some of that too. Whether we're making democracy look good or not, though, I think might be open to question. But hopefully people will look at it and see that, you know, we have some kind of self-regulating, a little bit chaotic but interesting process going on here that they might appreciate. We're not just ruled by Bush.
Yeah, I hope so, and I would certainly be reluctant to say, you know, we should be overly conscious of how our political discourse looks abroad. I mean, right. I think the first goal should be to reach the right, you know,
and there's no way to control it. I mean, obviously, we're going to have an open debate here, and other countries can avoid doing that, but it's obviously our American value here that we're going to have a big debate, and we're going to talk about things. So, you know I get upset about it a lot because I feel like, oh no, don't let the outsiders see that you can wear us down like this. It's going to really hurt our interests. But there's really no stopping it, and it's what we are, so that's the way it's going to be. Yeah,
and it may be that you get yourself in such a fix that a kind of calculated retreat is the least bad alternative. I mean, it will be seen as a kind of retreat if we leave Iraq. There's no doubt about it.
Don't call it retreat. It's phased redeployment.
Oh, that's right. The foreigners might be watching. I'm sorry, I didn't say retreat. We'll bleep that.
Redeployment.
A phased redeployment. You're right. No, that's what I meant to say. I've always gotten those two mixed up: retreat and phased redeployment. So, now Hillary's...
As opposed to a hasty retreat. Instead of hasty, it's phased. And instead of retreat, it's redeployment.
Right. I'm in favor of considered retreats. Well-considered retreats. So the Hillary thing, as you pointed out, and I hadn't realized, coincided with a big event in Barack Obama's...
Obama announced it. Well, it's some kind of a stage. It's not quite that he's announced, but he's announced that he's going to announce it. I don't like all these steps, but you know, it struck me that people are always saying Hillary Clinton is so calculating, but wasn't it calculating of Obama to do his little announcement right as she was about to come back from Iraq and make her big statement?
You think that was it?
He took a lot of the wind out of her sails, didn't he?
I guess. I don't know. You think he's that calculating, huh?
Yeah, I'm going to say he is. I think he knows what he's doing. I mean, it's to his credit if he knows what he's doing.
It would be nice to have a president who knows what he's doing. I would welcome that.
I'm looking for someone to demonstrate competence, so I think that was a rather competent thing to do.
Yeah. Sign me up.
I mean, I'm thinking about Barack Obama and thinking about him, this whole first woman president versus first black president. And, I kind of like the idea of Barack Obama, the self-made man, as opposed to the wife of a former president being the first in that pair of possible firsts.
You could just put them on the same ticket. That might be a little too much in the way of firsts. And I hadn't thought about that. I had talked about a Gore-Obama ticket, which I think would be in some ways attractive.
I kind of like Gore, actually.
Yeah, no, I like Gore. I think that would be a good ticket, Gore-Obama. I'm trying to encourage that rumor.
Obama just seems to be so strong now that it's hard to picture him in the second place.
No, it would only be if he didn't have the votes in the end. I mean, Gore is the one person who could show up in the campaign fairly late, which doesn't mean many months from now, but it means, he could just walk right in and have an impact and be a real figure. Most people can't, but he could, so I can imagine him gaining enough momentum so that Obama had to settle for number 2, and I'm sure he would if he had to. I can't imagine Gore settling for number 2. So a lot of people are going to think
that that's weird that you think Gore can just swoop in and make it through, but I've been thinking about that too, and it makes sense to me. Why do you think that Gore has the ability to do that?
Well, just because he's already won the popular vote once. I mean, he's clearly, and I mean, so you would think he's kind of a viable candidate on those grounds. Moreover, let's face it, the Bush presidency has amounted to a kind of implicit validation of Gore. I mean, Gore lost the contested election, won the popular vote, the guy who won has now been completely discredited. I think it's safe to say that most Americans wish Gore had become president.
It does stir up a kind of a wishful thinking that you like to imagine that if only we'd taken the other path, everything would have been different.
Boy, would it have been, because, they're just almost opposites. I mean, my view is that it's almost, it may turn out to be a tragedy of global proportions, a fork in the road kind of thing, because, 9/11 would have happened in either event, I think, and Gore would have responded quite differently. I think he would have done the Afghanistan war.
He would have done a lot of similar things, I think.
Well, he would have done the Afghanistan war. I don't think he would have done Iraq, and the main thing is he would have been mindful of the need that I think had been illustrated by 9/11 to shore up a lot of international institutions. I mean, for example, the Bush administration just flushed the Biological Weapons Convention, and a whole new version of that had been kind of negotiated. They were working on it. They were going to finally put some teeth in it, and the kind of Bolton wing in the Bush administration just said sayonara. Arms control. The Bush administration continues to flush international arms control mechanisms down the drain. That's what this deal with India represents, is a demotion of the NPT. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, which, of course, needs huge amounts of work and is not viable in its present form. But that's the kind of thing I think Gore would have paid attention to, not to mention, of course, all the environmental stuff, the environmental institutions.
Well, I mean, it's easy to say with respect to what didn't happen that it would have been a lot better. But in the case of this administration, it's very easy to say that it would have been better, especially since so many things went badly that, yes, they don't even have to have gone that well for it to seem like it would have been much better. But whether he can just arise from the past and show up in this new election when he hasn't been that active, other than with his movie.
No, but the fact remains he's a guy who was a senator and was vice president, and he's got the resume, much more than Obama does.
Well, what do you think is going to happen with Obama? Is the lack of a resume going to catch up with him, or are people going to just accept that?
It's a good question. I mean, I do think he's going to have to. I think
he's the same as Edwards. People eventually accepted Edwards, didn't they?
They did, although I personally think he's worn out his welcome. I think Edwards kind of impresses you at first, and the more you hear him, the more you wonder whether there's a there there. I actually think Obama will last longer than that. I think he has a more authentic feel than Edwards, and is at least as smart and knowledgeable. So I think Edwards is history personally, and I think Obama will have a longer shelf life. I do think that people are going to start saying, okay, everyone says that you're refreshingly candid. Now remind us what it is you're refreshingly candid about, because he does a better job of conveying an air of candor than of actually being candid. And I think he's going to have to flesh himself out. I mean, you I think it was on your blog. You this Harry Belafonte quote.
Right, and Al Sharpton,
and
Jesse Jackson. There was an article. It was in the Times Online, the London Times, right, about black leaders' lack of enthusiasm for Obama. And basically, a lot of them were saying, well, Sharpton's quote was, we don't know what he's truly about. And what was the Belafonte quote?
The Belafonte quote was some king metaphor. It's like, we have the king's clothing, but where's the king? I mean, the recurring theme was, where's the beef, kind of.
Well, I sort of had the impression that there was an idea that the traditional black leaders were in a much more left liberal position, and that Obama didn't look like he was going to go there, and that there was some kind of insistence that he actually go into a more left position to be acceptable to them, and that, I think there's sort of just a fear that they're going to become irrelevant, since the media always gives them a lot of attention, and Obama has the ability to, leap over them and become the black person to talk to. And yet he'll be more mellow and conciliatory and middle of the road, and they're not going to like that. And so when they're saying, we don't know what he's truly about yet, what they're saying is, we don't know that he's going to really come over to our side. And we're afraid of becoming irrelevant because of that.
Yeah, I think Sharpton must sense that Obama is not following the Sharpton model. I mean,
he'd be a fool too, wouldn't he?
Well, Sharpton's good at getting attention. I don't see him getting elected president anytime soon. But he's not even following the Jesse Jackson model. In other words, Obama is a black leader whose identity goes well beyond his blackness, right? I mean, he's not fundamentally about black issues the way Sharpton and Jesse Jackson are. Now, I mean, in addition to that, Sharpton is a little bit of an ambulance chaser, and arguably Jesse Jackson has a little of that in him, and Obama is not those things either. But even...
Well, Obama seems much more like just a traditional mainstream white politician. I mean, part of the problem is, if that's why people like him so much, is that he's not like those other black leaders. Those other black leaders have reason to be upset about it, don't they? I mean, because he's making himself so popular by being actually fairly bland and mainstream.
Yeah, I'm not sure bland is. I do think he gets some traction out of seeming, again, seeming a little more candid and less boring than the average politician. But look, compared to Al Sharpton,
he doesn't. Does he raise any questions that really make people feel uncomfortable?
No, that's what I mean. I mean, he hasn't. That's why I think the "where's the there" question is going to arrive. And
then he's going to displace the leaders who have traditionally made Americans face up to problems that are uncomfortable to look at. And they may be firebrands, and they may exaggerate or get a lot of things wrong some of the time, or whatever. But still, I mean, they have played a role over the years of making Americans face up to things that they would rather not talk about a lot of the time. And then here comes Obama, and suddenly everyone loves him, but he's not really pressing those issues anymore.
No, he's not, but that's the reason you can imagine him becoming president.
Right, I mean that's the way to become president, obviously.
Yeah.
So it makes perfect sense for Obama to do that. But
I mean, you got to make up your mind. Jesse Jackson ran for president, but could not have been elected president. And there's a role for that kind of black leader.
Jesse Jackson '88 button. Yeah.
Were you a Jackson supporter?
I was for Jackson back then, yeah. But by the time...
You've really covered some territory,
What?
I'll tell you.
I should have brought my button in. I still have the button.
I mean, I just couldn't with Jackson. Just the idea of a president who spoke in rhyme, I just found kind of disorienting. But
yes, it's hard for me to remember why that seemed like such a good idea at the time. But that was back
maybe
then.
It was the rhyme.
That was in '88.
Yeah, I remember it well.
You know?
So you were a Jacksonite. I mean, I knew that
During
you
the
had...
primary season, for a while at least.
Yeah.
By the time, yeah.
And then you had a little bit of a drift to the right, it's safe to say, since your Jesse Jackson days. And now you may be...
I don't know, the right-wingers are all mad at me now.
Well, I know, and I think that may be what we saw playing out in the comments section after your last dialogue, is now you've alienated the right-wing part of your constituency, and you got to have a foundation.
I don't really... You know, because this is the thing. You get the more people you have that hate you, the bigger you are in the blogosphere. So, you know, I had this whole faction on my right that I could goad into antagonism, and I made the move.
That was very canny.
No, but really, that all happened because I was invited to this big right-wing confabulation that went on for, 9 hours and several nights, and... I just couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah, I've been to a Liberty Fund conference myself, and mine was back, I think, before there was the Internet, so you wouldn't have been like in email contact with the outside world, and I suspect they were even weirder back then than whatever you endured.
Well, I mean, we were sort of celebrating this man who had written in, Frank Miller, who had written in the, I'm getting his name wrong, Frank Meyer, who had written in the National Review back in the late 50s and early 60s and was opposed to all of these civil rights things. And I was surrounded by people who wanted to talk about the lofty philosophy of it all, and only in abstract terms, and, pay no attention to the whole racial aspect of this that was going on at the time, and that was the reason why he was writing the way he was. And no one wanted to talk about that, not surprisingly.
So this is where the Jesse Jackson part of your political identity came out.
Yeah.
The blatant part.
Oh, I mean,
and then you got into this big fight with Jonah Goldberg on Blogging Heads TV over that. See, I think that's when you started to alienate your part of your constituency, and we saw the gruesome results in the comments section.
I was trying to keep those conservatives like Jonah on my side and only attack the libertarians because they were really making me mad with their, their interest in these like really hardcore ideological abstractions. That's what I didn't like. And I thought the social conservatives were different and Burkean and that sort of thing. So I thought I could get along with Jonah. And the
But he
thing is,
didn't
the
join.
thing about blogging heads is we look like we're looking at each other, but we're not looking at each other. We're
No.
only hearing each other. And
Right.
if you look at the blogging heads with me and Jonah, I have no idea that he's scowling the whole time. I have no idea how angry he looks, you know.
Jonah,
I'm
I like that about
smiling
Jonah.
and-
He's very expressive, and he's like me in that he's got a little bit of a temper, I think. I respect that in
But
a
I
blogging
couldn't hear
head.
that. I could see it in the final video, but I couldn't hear it when I was talking to him, or I probably would have said different things.
Yeah, you can't hear somebody rolling their eyes.
Although but I refer to rolling my eyes at him in the beginning of the dialogue, so I actually gave him the idea in part
Ah,
to make faces.
the
I mean,
truth
because
comes
that's one
out.
thing you can do with blogging heads. You can hold up signs, you can hold up, props. You never know what the other person is doing.
That's true. No, and that leads to a lot of high comedy.
Yeah, I think it should be exploited more. I like some of the things.
Props. Do you have any props?
Today, do I have any props? Not really. Sorry. No. No, I could try to make faces, but, yeah.
We had a dueling mugs thing, and somebody was talking about making dueling mugs part of the
And there's an
part
old,
of the shtick.
there's an old one with you and Mickey, where Mickey is wearing a suit and combing his hair, and
Mickey
you
is
don't know how
totally
he's dressed. What?
Mickey is totally without pride. I mean, Mickey will stoop to depths that I celebrate because they're great. They're great.
Yeah.
For blogging heads, I'm not sure they're great for Mickey.
But I think there's a lot of comedy potential of things you can do with just the little screen that you have, and the fact that the other person can't see you. I think you could do a lot of cool things.
Totally.
I mean, it's
Are you
really
doing
just
any of them? Are you doing any of them right now?
No, I should have planned something, but I don't have anything actually.
That would be really funny.
Yeah,
that
it
would be really funny if you
I
just
had
if you
something.
just
But
if you
no,
just
I
did
think,
some
I think
zany
it's
thing.
a fertile artistic field, and that there's it's just a comedy gold mine, but someone has to mine it.
Yeah. Well, we'll get there first, I assure you.
What?
We will get there first. Blogging heads will blaze that frontier, whatever the metaphor is. So, on this issue of racial politics, the Duke rape case,
Right.
on your blog, you called attention to some presumably left-wing professors who, right after the case hit the headlines, wrote some outraged public letter or something.
They put up an ad that was mostly a collection of quotes from various students, and you can it's up on the web so you can see what it was. But now they were assuming that the charges were true, and they were using it as an occasion to sort of heighten everyone's awareness of problems of racial prejudice and sexualized violence and that, the usual issues that you would expect about the climate of things on campus. So this is an ongoing issue that professors at a lot of universities are interested in, as you must know, right? And then the idea is, well, now this is like a teaching moment, or this is a learning occasion. Let's use this to, now that we've got your attention, let's use this to remind you that there are always these broad issues of the climate having to do with race and gender on campus, which is, just an ongoing issue for decades that people want to bring front and center. So they took advantage of the occasion of the accusations of rape, and then, as those things deteriorated, those accusations seemed unfounded over the months, they started to be criticized, and there were demands that they apologize. So the most recent thing is that they're not apologizing, And they said, we think, so their new open letter, we think the ad's authors, were, in other words, themselves, were right to give voice to the students quoted whose suffering is real. And they say there are real issues of race and sexual violence on campus, So, and that the disaster, that there's a social disaster, they say, and the disaster is the atmosphere. Okay, so, that's really this long-going issue that many professors and students are trying to bring out in universities, which is there are all of these problems of race and sex on campus, and people need to pay attention to them. But that got intertwined with the whole issue of whether the accusations of rape were true, and then taking advantage of it as an occasion for sensitizing people to the climate issue kind of got all problematic.
Well, if they had done a brief mea culpa first, would the rest of the letter have then been okay with you? If they had said we shouldn't have been so quick to judge, and I don't actually know how explicit their initial judgment of guilt had been.
It wasn't. Actually, it's not that bad what they did, but I think that they could have apologized a little more. I don't have that much problem with what they did, although I think that I have a bit of a problem with exaggerations of the racial and gender problems on campus, and with the sort of ongoing industry of just trying to exploit that and exaggerate that and demand remedies for it, for example, with speech codes and things like that, maybe with not enough attention to the interests on the other side, and that was a little bit glaring here when you look at how the people who were accused got treated. But I think there are issues of race and gender that are important. So some of that is good. Some of it is a little overdone and exploitative. And I'm also a little worried that they've undercut their own cause by seeming like they don't care enough about the students who were accused.
Yeah, I mean, although I mean, the students who were accused, if they were accused falsely of rape, yes, they deserve sympathy. I've got to say at the same time that the whole kind of culture that party was part of is not something I especially celebrate.
Right.
And I actually think that athletics in colleges, often the sports programs are a pernicious influence culturally. Right. I mean, I'm a little sensitive to this because I went to high school in Texas, and football at a Texas high school is just a ridiculous phenomenon. I had a big Texas high school. And that's...
football's kind of big here, too.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're at a big state school, and then my first year in college was actually in Texas, and it was a small enough school so that the athletic contingent exerted a big influence, and it was largely bad. It was just bad. The schools just should not be using their resources to put people who would subscribe to the kind of ethos that was on display at that party on a pedestal, but they really do. And look, there are great jocks, and there was Bill Bradley, and so on. But by and large, I personally think the average male scholarship athlete in a major sport is not a role model we should be using the school's resources to elevate. And they do it in high school, and they do it in college. So, I guess I haven't...
Well, I mean, sports are an important part of college life, especially at some universities like mine. I mean, sports are a really big part of the culture here, and in many positive ways. Now, obviously there's some negative things, and I'm not an insider to what really goes on at these places, but I think exaggerating it ends up backfiring because now these people are sort of victims themselves, and it makes accusations seem... Now the thing that people will remember will be that false accusations were made. Assuming they are false, maybe they're not. But now the cultural meaning is that false accusations get made, and you have to worry about people who will be victimized by women who make false accusations. And that's just going to resonate in the culture for a long time. That's very harmful to a lot of things that feminists and critical race theory people and so on work very hard to get people to take seriously over the years. I think that's the saddest part about it, is that if you cry wolf, if you exaggerate things wrongly, you empower the other side.
Oh yeah, I mean it was and actually I was never sold on this story to begin with. I mean it started seeming a little dubious fairly early on, obviously that's bad. I mean the whole issue of the whole issue of rape that's kind of not done in public is a very problematic thing, because it so often winds up being the words of the accuser against the words of the accused. This one would have been more public than most, actually, in that regard. The fact is, actually, now I'll stop there.
Feminists worked very hard for many years to get rape taken seriously, and the standard thing that was always said was, what rape is, it's a woman that changes her mind the next day, or it's a prostitute that didn't get paid, and, you have to protect the man, it's so easy to be accused, and how's he going to defend himself? And feminists worked so hard for a long time to get rape taken seriously, including, rape between people who start out in a consensual situation. And I think a lot of progress was made, and something like this has a big undermining effect on a lot of progress, I think.
Yeah.
And people are going to remember this. It's so conspicuous.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's, I don't know. Yeah, I have nothing further to say, I guess.
But we have something to say about the way academics have pushed this sort of climate issue to try to get people to believe that there is something terrible going on campuses, that there's all kinds of discrimination and hatred on the campus that people need to, become alert about and take remedies for.
Well, I mean, I'm first of all against hysterical proclamations, and I suspect this letter had a little of that. I mean, these people are a little quick to pull the trigger, and they probably, they probably mustered a little more outrage than was actually manifestly due at that point. I think the issues of race on campus are very profound, and I do think there's a sense in which they're more profound than gender issues. Not in the sense that the injustice done is necessarily any greater, but in the sense that the potential for kind of social fragmentation is greater. Mm-hmm. I mean, history's full of examples of societies literally being torn apart along boundaries of race or religion, ethnicity in general. There are no known examples, I think, of societies actually being torn apart along lines of gender. In other words,
but from a feminist perspective, I mean, that's the issue, is that you're forced to sleep with the enemy. And so you're not forced in that sense, but, because men and women will stay together, it's very hard to make progress for women because, there's a divide and conquer strategy. The enemy has a divide and conquer strategy. They'll pick off many of the women, and the women will ally with men, and you'll never be able to really get solidarity among women because of that. So that's a problem.
What's an example of being picked off? What's an example of something a woman does that
pairs off with a man, marries, and forms a relationship with a man?
Well, if you're talking about women who think it's a betrayal of the cause to have a relationship with a man, I just don't ever see them, attaining political dominance, right?
But that's a problem for feminism, is that women don't necessarily want to associate that much with other women or view themselves as having uniform interests with other women. They're more interested, they have personal interests in forming alliances with men, and that prevents, a major effort from being made by feminism. That hurts feminism. But it's not that you would want it to be otherwise. I'm not saying it should be otherwise, but it just presents a special problem for feminism. I mean, you could say, as you just did, that means you don't get the same kind of problems where people start fighting each other. Men and women are not going to divide into two completely different factions.
Right, on a national level. I mean, they fight, men fight women, they argue with them, and they sometimes actually fight, but at a social level, it doesn't have the same potential for divisiveness. I mean, but I think you're more describing radical feminism than feminism per se, right? I mean, there are certainly a lot of feminists who don't think it's the sacred duty of a feminist not to have a relationship with a man, right?
Well, but I think a lot of feminists might recognize that there's a problem getting women to see women's interests generally, because women will also look at their specific self-interest and see a reason to not align politically with other women, because they can be more successful with men if they don't adopt the feminist line.
Yeah, I do think there are a lot of feminisms. Katha Pollitt once did a kind of taxonomy that I used to use, and I think what you're describing would be in what she called the realm of radical feminism. I think it was her. Yeah, I think she did it.
Yeah. There's a built-in defense against really radical feminism, which is that people want to have their personal relationships. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But.
I mean, I am against a highly judgmental form of feminism. In other words, a feminism that looks at the role that a woman chooses to adopt in a marriage. I mean, assuming it's not, submission to physical abuse or something, and decides that there's something wrong with it. I mean, I just think, all kinds of different marriages can work, and and if people find a formula for that, God bless them, if they're not doing any harm to the outside world or to their children. Or, ultimately, kind of deep harm to themselves. But, and that's the only thing I kind of object to about a certain amount of feminist discourse, I guess. I don't know. But are you, well, here's a question. Are you a feminist?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, what does that mean? Well, you're not against women having relationships with men.
No, but I think it's frustrating from a feminist perspective that a lot of women don't care enough about feminism because their personal interests are so strongly oriented toward forming good relationships with men, and that men, you know.
But what's an example?
What?
What's an example of a woman in a relationship failing, in your view, to uphold the banner of feminism? Is it if she takes the man's last name? Is it if she stays at home with the kids while the man works? What is it?
If she's too deferential to his interests and too willing to serve him, because that's a way to keep the relationship going. I think excessive service, I would say.
Excessive service. So like making the food,
just
doing the dishes,
picking up, doing all the work in the relationship, doing the work in the relationship.
What if he has some completely horrible job that he hates, but he does it because it brings the money home? And what she does, which she hates, is the dishes.
I could see people having a division of labor and making their own arrangements. And it should be individualized. But I think if one person is giving more than the other, if it's not equal, there are different ways of being equal. You don't have to do exactly the same thing.
Well, exactly, and that's why I'm reluctant to judge people's marriages, because the accounting can be very subtle.
Oh,
right?
I wouldn't judge individual people's marriages. I think that's incredibly presumptive and intrusive. So I'm not saying to do that. I just tend to think that most women give more, and that men have options to go with other women. If you're not going to give enough, why would he could find someone else who would.
Well, there is this imbalance of power that emerges, unfortunately, from some fairly stubborn forces in human nature, which is that, as time goes on, men can find themselves being in a stronger bargaining position, so to speak, for the reason you described. And I won't get into the evolutionary psychology of it, or what is, in my view, the evolutionary psychology of it, but I think if you buy this, if you think there is this asymmetry as the couple ages in terms of the relative power, in terms of the alternatives available to the two of them, it can be a case for some institutions that I think you can use it to argue that women's interests are served by some institutions that I think feminism has sometimes cast doubt on. I don't really know, but for example...
Wait, what are you saying, that if it's natural to have evolved into an unequal position, that feminism shouldn't fight against it because it's natural?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying society, on grounds of kind of justice, may want to do something. For example, there are certain kinds of divorce laws that make a male pay a stiff price if he leaves his wife and children, and I think that's right. And I think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's just, for example, I think no-fault divorce sometimes works to the disadvantage of a woman in that position.
Yeah.
And I think that wasn't that kind of a liberal cause, or so? Wasn't that kind of a liberal thing to do? Here's the problem, man. Here's the problem. Some feminists have, as part of their dogma, that there are no differences, significant kind of psychological differences between men and women. Or in other words, they don't buy into the evolutionary psychology that I think is relevant. And I just spelled out a case where I think what is in fact an asymmetry, and it boils down to the fact that older women are less attractive to men than older men are to women, although God knows...
I've seen a lot of men my age, and I think they look pretty awful.
Look, they both get less attractive with age, unfortunately. I'm really... But for various reasons, come on, which is a more common sight? 70-year-old guy walking along, clearly affluent, with some, 32-year-old attractive woman on his arm, or 70-year-old woman, clearly affluent, walking... And you couldn't say it's because she's not affluent.
But it's not that he's actually attractive. It's that she is attracted to his money and power.
Well, we could argue about what's really going on in her head, and I agree that some of it may be calculated, but for whatever reason, he has that alternative available to him, right? He had the option of leaving his 70-year-old wife.
Yeah.
In a way that a 70-year-old wife often does not have. Now, see, I think that highlights a peril that women face unfairly as a marriage goes on.
Right.
But if you're a radical feminist who denies differences between men and women and in their relative attractiveness and in what they find attractive, you can't get to the point of acknowledging that kind of asymmetry, which I think underlies...
I don't think that's the radical position. I think that's kind of the mainstream position, to say there aren't differences. I think it's more radical to say that there are differences and to make a big deal out of them.
Actually, you're right. Actually, now I remember the piece I wrote in response to Katha's taxonomy, and you're right. So, whatever form, I believe that any feminism founded on the premise that there are no firm psychological differences between men and women is doomed to not be completely successful. And that's my line. I mean, I wrote a piece a long time ago for the New Republic that is not on the web. It was so long ago, so I won't link to it. It was called Feminists Meet Mr. Darwin or something, a title Andrew Sullivan thought up and imposed on it.
Well, I mean, I don't know if feminists would agree. I don't remember that article. I probably read it back at the time, though. But, I mean, the way feminists would talk about women being different might not be quite the same as the way they evolved to be different or would cotton to this natural selection business, you know. I mean, feminists would more want to change things and criticize the way things are.
Well,
what I'm saying is that, you know, there's no law that's going to change who decides to pair up with whom. And, you know, people are going to do what they're going to do in their individual interests. And it's hard to get people stirred up about changing, you know, changing all of society when their own interests are staring them in the face. So people are going to look for someone to pair up with, and they're going to take advantage of what they can. And they may still be critical of some of these larger patterns, but there's a limit to how much they're going to do because they have so much self-interest.
Yeah, no, there is a limit. I'm you know, I'm just saying that, for example, in this case, I think men should be held to a strict standard, even though, you know, certain aspects of nature are going to ultimately, you know, may tempt them to desert, you know, to forego their obligations, their marital obligations. I think.
And
still,
then they're going to get sicker earlier. They're going to die younger, and these younger women are going to have to take care of them in their decline. I don't think that's a very good bargain for the younger woman either.
No. And you know, maybe one solution is to put people in touch with the kind of, you know, cognitive biases that are going to get them to buy into bad deals if they're not careful. But you see, my basic point is it seems to me any remedial policy about anything is going to be in trouble if it starts off with a confused view of human nature. And you may or may not accept my view, but my view is what it is, and it does involve there being some differences between the genders. Another example is sexual harassment. I think Justice Ginsburg wanted the reasonable person. You know, the question is, what would a reasonable person feel harassed by, right? And Justice Ginsburg wanted a kind of transgender definition of what a reasonable person would feel threatened by in the way of harassment. And one thing I said, I think in this piece I alluded to, is, I'm sorry, but it's just asymmetrical. Men are not, you know, men do not live, for example, they don't find the thought of a woman raping them threatening in the way that women find the thought of a man raping them. They do not, there are certain aspersions you can cast on a woman that don't have the same valence as a man. The average man considers it a compliment if you say he sleeps around. And I'm not saying that's an especially firm difference per se, but I think the traditional asymmetry in the way those aspersions are cast, you know, she's a slut, he's a stud, have some oblique basis in human nature, and you're probably never going to completely eradicate the asymmetry. And anyway, that, I mean, for better or worse, I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying it's not going to be easily eradicated.
People used to think that if you just had sexual liberation, if you just got rid of the double standard and said women can do all these things too, that the problem would solve itself. And obviously that didn't happen.
Didn't happen in the 60s. They formed these communes and said, let's everybody sleep with everybody. But no.
Yeah. I grew up when that was the idea was, you know, hey, look, we could just stop believing this thing and then everything would be different. Everything.
How'd it work out?
It worked out really badly.
Did you have any fun in the meanwhile?
Me? No.
Yeah. Did any men?
What?
Did any men have fun in the meanwhile?
I don't know how fun it was for people. I think men had more fun than women. I think it was kind of another male. I mean, from a feminist perspective, you would say that the sexual liberation movement was another male plot to oppress women.
Wait, say that again? I think you're close to saying something I'm going to endorse, but can you say it again?
I think that from a feminist perspective, you could say that the sexual revolution was just another male plot that worked to oppress women.
Well, it may have been, and I think the underlying tenet that men and women are identical psychologically is more often used to oppress women than to oppress men. I mean, men use that line on women, or they use the belief to justify their behavior. After exploiting women, after kind of sleeping with a woman under false pretenses, implicitly conveying some ongoing emotional commitment, then sleeping with her once or twice or three times, and leaving, what they tell themselves is, oh, well, she's just like me, There's no reason to give her any special consideration by virtue of the fact that she's a woman. Well, no, it's not like dealing with you. It's like dealing with a woman.
And then women who would say, I'm like a man, and say that they would do those things would, that would be a way of bragging and of making yourself more popular to men. And that's another way. Well,
popular in a certain sense, not necessarily a more attractive like marriage item, but somebody that men want to see for a little while, for sure. But I don't know. I mean, I do think a number of women have kind of said.
You can see how easy it is to be a feminist because no matter what happens, it hurts women. So tell me what happened, and I'll tell you why it hurts women. Whatever it is, it's going to hurt women.
Well, hey, I'm telling you, being a man is no picnic either, Ann, really.
Well, you will die earlier.
But that's just the beginning of the trouble.
That's the one
that will be the end of my suffering, Ann. That will be the end.
We should drag in this story about Condoleezza Rice and...
the mommy thing?
Yeah, obviously Condoleezza Rice did not marry.
So what did Nancy Pelosi say?
No, it wasn't Nancy Pelosi, it was Barbara Boxer.
Oh, was it Barbara Boxer? Okay.
Barbara Boxer was... where is the quote? She was talking... She had a whole riff going about who pays the price. I actually defended Barbara Boxer on this, but... Barbara Boxer was questioning Condoleezza Rice about the Iraq War, and she got into this riff, which is about how other people's children are the ones who go and fight in Iraq, and she got to a part where she said, as I understand it, basically called attention to her childlessness. And
but did she mean to? Was that clearly the reference?
Well, I think it was just, this stock argument that other people are paying the price. And she was just mentioning that, everybody knows Condoleezza Rice doesn't have children. And then nobody really said very much until Tony Snow kind of flagged it for people and said, this is a quote from Tony Snow, I don't know if she was intentionally tacky. It's a great leap backward for feminism. So Tony Snow kind of flagged it, and the bloggers and various people picked it up and made it into an issue like, gasping Boxer is anti-feminist, and how dare she attack a woman for not having children and so forth. I think some of that was a little overinflated, but it led to a big discussion about whether it is some special offense to say about a woman calling attention to a woman's childlessness. Now, I took the equality viewpoint and said that the feminist position should be that it shouldn't be any worse to say that about a man or a woman. It's not a special offense to say about a woman, you don't have any children who could serve in the war. But I think people do know that it hurts women more. So if you say it and you mean to say it, it's a way to know that you can kind of get at women or stir up prejudice about women, like, drawing attention to their childlessness, making them look tragic and unwomanly and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a source of pride for men to have a lot of children. In some cultures, very dramatically so, and even a source of shame for them not to. But maybe you're right, and it's more generally that the feeling is more intense in a lot of women. I don't know.
But there's something unnatural. If a man doesn't have if a woman doesn't have children, that she hasn't fulfilled her destiny, or she hasn't, she's missing some basic womanliness.
Could be. Well, I mean, is it clear that that's what Boxer meant? I thought by one reading she was saying...
I don't think it is. I mean, I defended Boxer, so I'm not saying that about her. But I thought it was interesting that there was a big to-do over it. And I thought it was interesting that Tony Snow kind of got it going. It wouldn't have happened otherwise, I don't think.
And somebody pointed out that Barbara Bush had said something about Condi, like, well, she could...
A certain person called Mickey Kaus pointed that out.
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, he said, he quoted Laura Bush as saying...
Laura Bush.
Laura Bush had said, you need a very supportive family and supportive friends to become president. And that she noted that Rice is single and her parents are no longer living. She's an only child. So Laura Bush had called attention to her lack of a family. And Mickey had written that, well, isn't that bad, too? How come people didn't get upset about that, Although some people pointed out that Laura Bush was, and Mickey posted again on it, I think, today, that Laura was really talking about men and women, that it would be hard for any single person to be president because they wouldn't have a loving family around them to help them.
Well, for that matter, Barbara Boxer could have said the same thing to a man, and,
Right.
Barbara Boxer didn't say this is especially offensive because you're a woman.
Exactly, and that's what I said. I mean, I think feminism would be in a better position if we didn't perceive it as being a special attack. On the other hand, maybe you should say, maybe you particularly should say, that we know that if someone points out a woman's childlessness, that it's not just the same as for a man, and that it's a way of, it's a way of trying to hurt a woman or to stir up prejudice about her.
Yeah.
And
no,
certainly
I
with
think...
respect to Condoleezza Rice, people who don't like her like to do that, like to kind of bring out some idea that she's mannish or that she's missing empathy that women are supposed to have.
Now, I do agree that reinforcing the idea that a woman's calling is to have children could be, like an unfortunate source of pressure on women who choose another path, and that would be bad. So am I a feminist?
There are many kinds of feminism, so you're always
I'm
hitting
one
at
kind.
least one of them, aren't you?
I'm a Bob feminist. Well,
but I think
an
people
hour?
have to avoid setting up the... I mean, Boxer served up a kind of a softball for people to hit, and Tony Snow pointed it out, so everyone did it. I think in the political discourse, people ought to, be careful not to do that, because with all the bloggers waiting around to grab those things and chew them up and looking for material...
the new age of transparency.
It's stupid to let things like that out.
You can't get away with anything these days. So we've gone on a while, but we wanted to say a little something about American Idol, right?
American Idol, yeah.
So, you're like a total junkie, right?
I've been watching it since the first season, which is before I started blogging, and ever since I've been blogging, I'm starting my fourth year of blogging, but for 3 years, every year I have blogged about every single episode of American Idol. So,
as it's going on.
Well, I use TiVo, so it's a TiVo assisted. But
I see.
But yeah, so in fact, some of the people who like my blog will specifically say, I don't understand with the American Idol blogging, but I can see where the traffic's coming from, and I get a lot of people who are just Googling the names of various contestants, and so I write about it in detail, naming the contestants and so forth. And I get a lot of traffic of people wanting to, not only watching the show, but wanting to read about the show online afterwards. I mean, people are really into it.
It's a funny show. I mean, at the end of the season, you're looking at a bunch of quite talented people and an interesting competition among them.
Right.
At the beginning of the season, like right now, you're basically seeing mainly horribly untalented people and horribly deluded people, or else maybe in some cases people who are feigning delusion in order to get on American Idol now that it's become known that you can do it.
So, who are the fakers who are putting on a comedy show, and who are the people who are actually deluded, and then is it wrong to laugh at them? Some of them actually seem to have mental disabilities, actually.
Well, I caught just fragments of last night's show in order to be ready for this, and the guy, the kind of large guy in the orange who sang God Bless America, he seemed borderline retarded.
Yes.
And,
but they were nice
and
to
so
him.
did what's that?
They saw what he was, and they were not mean to him.
Well,
so
come on. I mean, by their standards.
Well, they modify how they talk to people, and some of the people they just viciously, they decide how cruel to be or how decent to be. And many
but fundamentally, they were subjecting him to a kind of ridicule. I mean,
that's right.
Holding up to be laughed at, which is something, I would have enjoyed when I was 13 or 14. And there are 13 and 14-year-olds out there, but I'm not sure it's a great sign that kind of thing attracts a huge following in America.
Yeah. But once you start to find the good ones, there's a lot of love for those people. So we're looking for people who are completely unknown, who decided to throw themselves out there, And then we bond with them. We vote for them, and we root for them over the weeks. But it's true that early on there's some people that are very ridiculous. But some of those people want to go on. They're choosing to go on. And I don't think they're using the most... Well, I think sometimes they may go a little too far and pick some people who actually are mentally disabled in some way. And maybe they shouldn't. And maybe it's wrong. Is it wrong to laugh? Is it okay to laugh at people? Is it okay to laugh at the way people look? Is it okay to laugh at people because they have a funny face or they're fat or something like that? You know, it is kind of a little transgressive, and I think, ordinary Americans are kind of getting into that, have a chance to do that a little bit in the early episodes. It's kind of wrong, but that's part of why it's funny.
Just doesn't seem to me especially healthy, and I wouldn't draw such a sharp line between those who are mentally disabled and those who aren't. I mean, all the people who go on and just cannot carry a tune are laboring under a mental handicap in some sense of the word. They don't get it.
I was told when I was quite young that I didn't sing the right notes, so I was always sensitive about that and would avoid even singing to one other person out of embarrassment. But apparently there are people who can really believe they can sing when they can't at all, and they're willing to go on television and let millions of people judge them. So,
but like that girl who was called, whose nickname was the Hotness or something. Now, I mean, look, I just think laughing at her is such a kind of elitist enterprise. She probably lives in a very low-income area. She goes to a very bad, or went to a very bad public school, and within that niche, she acquired a certain amount of esteem by being entertaining and wacky and singing. She had a certain kind of singing skill, but ultimately couldn't pull it off. And I don't know, for these people who have all made it in one sense or another, to kind of sit there and laugh at her just made me a little sick. Almost sicker than it made me when they laughed at the quasi-retarded guy.
It is a little wrong. It is a little wrong, but, I mean, it is like the sideshow of all.
It is a sideshow.
The idea that you could look at the freaks and...
I remember, I am old enough that I remember a freak show. In Midland, Texas, they set up a tent and brought in this guy named Hojo, who was like, I don't know, being a dwarf was just the beginning of his unusualness, and the audience would throw lit cigarette butts, and he'd eat them and stuff, and he really looked, I was very young, I only remember it dimly, but it's amazing that not so long ago, a true freak show was a legitimate thing. I guess I had thought we were making progress on that front, and I guess what I'm saying is American Idol is...
Well, there must be something in human nature. I mean, you must have an evolutionary psychology theory to go with this. Why do we want to look at the freak? Why do we want to single out some people to look at and laugh at? And
well, ridicule is a natural instrument to use, but, we often use it to derogate our enemies, right? In other words, the evaluation of the person kind of precedes the ridicule. You want to ridicule people whose interests you see as opposed to yours, right? Mm-hmm. You want to lower their status. I can't say I totally understand, and maybe that's what I'm not getting here, what the Darwinian value of ridicule generically is. I understand the strategic value of ridiculing.
On American Idol, it's a specific category of ridicule, which is these are the people. They weren't just minding their own business. They went to a lot of effort to put themselves forward, and they really believed in themselves. And maybe it's an antidote to the whole self-esteem movement that you see in the serious schools where everyone's supposed to feel good about themselves and everybody's
right.
good. It's sort of like, well, here are these people who have ridiculous over self-esteem, and they're having to face up to that. And, maybe we need some of that.
I do think the self-esteem stuff is overrated and overemphasized, and people should not have massively more quantities of self-esteem than is warranted by the facts on the ground. But I'm not sure this is the healthiest approach to reform in that area. One question, Simon is like brutally honest. Is it a British thing to be brutally honest? I mean, British obituaries are more harshly honest than American obituaries. The BBC, which I really like, but one thing I like about it is the total directness of the questioning when they're interviewing someone, and it's a directness that sometimes is harsh in its candor. I mean, is this because on the one hand you think of British people as being just elaborately polite, and yet there's this whole other side of the British character. I mean, have you noticed this?
Yeah, well, I think some of it has to do with, using verbal attacks. You have this sort of polite-sounding voice, but then you frame the language to insult people, and that there's this sort of a pride in the use of language that we don't necessarily have. We're more about, radiating niceness.
Simon is pretty good with the use of language.
Yeah, and I think Americans like to learn from the British, and I think we sort of do like to listen to how he puts things, partly because he's a great villain and we like the villain, and partly because he's not an American, so it's not us being cruel. But I think some of it is just actually wanting to hear someone, put things in interesting words, And maybe some of our interest in Borat also is this idea that someone with a foreign accent can say the things that we can't quite say.
Maybe. But don't you sometimes really dislike Simon for his cruelty? Don't you have flashes of anger toward him? No?
No, because people are bored. There's too much boring. There's too much niceness. There's too much boringness. There's too much people thinking they've got something when they don't. And someone who's, pithily telling things the way it is, it's a little bit like blogging,
Yeah, but in the later phases of American Idol, sometimes there really are pretty good people that he's just ripping apart.
Yeah.
And for reasons I don't always understand.
Yeah, he told, a couple of seasons ago, he told Jennifer Hudson that she was totally out of her league, and now she's, in this movie Dreamgirls, and she just won a Golden Globe Award, and everyone thinks she's wonderful. Yes. Yeah. Yeah,
he has erratic judgment. I also think the voters do, don't you? I mean, don't you think? I mean, this is going to sound like a liberal, elitist, East Coast thing to say, but in the final stages of American Idol, don't you think the voters, that is to say, I think it's largely a middle American votership, don't you think they often exhibit bad judgment?
Well, they're voting with their hearts, and they're voting a lot about love, and so it does say something about celebrity generally. It's not just about pure talent. It's some kind of psychic bond on some deep level.
Yeah, but they tend to bond with these, white bread, blonde girls who don't sing as well as... and there's definitely, I think, an underappreciation of the black singers on the part of the voters.
2 blacks have won. Out of 5 seasons? So
I guess they should have won about 4.9 times out of 5 seasons,
but
probably.
The black contestants have done well, and also some that have done well have been these really nerdy white guys. So they're not conventionally attractive. So I think that there are interesting opportunities for different kinds of people to win hearts, and some of it is by conventional beauty, but some of it is by having a sort of a personal style that is conventionally seen as not attractive, and then they can make it into attractive. So, like with Clay Aiken, I don't know if you know who he is, but he came in second in the second season, I think it was.
Wait, remind me. It's familiar. What did he look like?
He just looks like a little skinny, nerdy guy.
He looked like the guy with the shaved head, right?
No, he doesn't have a shaved head. He has red hair with was all spiked up on. But anyway, he looked like a completely ridiculous nerd, and people actually came to really love him, and that became a sort of a style that became lovable when it wasn't before. So I think there's kind of an ongoing creative process that the American people have with the show that's kind of about redefining what's attractive and what's lovable.
But what about that super nerdy guy? What was his name? He had a kind of Slavic first name. 2 years ago, blonde guy from Pennsylvania.
Oh.
He was so horrible, and he lasted forever.
Yeah, often there's a guy...
there was a touching story about how he'd been born with a hole in his lung or something.
Oh, yes, okay, I remember who he was. I think his name was
John
Stevens.
Was he bad, or was he bad?
No, it was Anthony Fedorov.
Right, Fedorov, that was the
I can't believe
Slavic
I remember
part.
all these names, but yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah, sometimes it's the personal story that people... that keeps someone going longer than they should. And sometimes it's just that they're young and you sort of start feeling like they're your child. And you have a
I never feel that way, Anne, except about my children. I'm a Darwinian through and through.
Well, maybe you should put them on the show so all America could fall in love with them.
I think I won't, thanks. I can only think of 2 ways that could turn out badly for them. If they won and if they lost. Otherwise, it would be a great experience. Well, listen, we've just set the record for length.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think we kind of earned it. It wasn't bad. It was kind of interesting.
Well, maybe no one's still watching, so we could say anything now.
No, I think they hate you too much to quit watching you.
They'll say, I can't believe you not only had her on, you let her go longer than anybody. She wouldn't shut up.
Okay, well, that comment's taken now, so they can't use that. They'll have to be more creative.
Yeah, I'm preempting that.
Yeah. Well, good thinking. You're a strategic mastermind.
Yeah, really.
Well, thanks. This was fun.
Okay, yes.
And I'll keep watching American Idol.
Okay, you should, yeah. And vote.
And reading your blogging on
definitely.
it. Okay. See you around.
Okay, bye-bye.